If you're going to get reparations, you're talking about getting them from the Iraqi people. Basically, Saddam Hussein doesn't have a big bank account. So are we going to fight over squeezing these people who are defeated when we have said all along our war is not against those?
First of all, Pat, they're sitting on enormous oil wealth, as you know, with any country in the world, any bank in the world is willing to give them lots of money. They've got lots of money that's sitting in the ground beneath them. And if they hadn't spent $50 billion on armament, they would still have lots of money. Second of all, yeah, I think the Kuwaiti people deserve reparations. They've been brutalized. They've been mistreated. There's
It's a great question. How many people die to achieve reparations? Pat put it the other night. You're talking about blood for money in that case.
I would like to see reparations, but clearly that cannot be the defining issue. And also peace and stability in the Middle East is also part of that.
How can you have peace and stability when you got Adolf Hitler on his throne in Baghdad?
If Adolf Hitler had been defeated at the Sudetenland, then I don't think he would have lasted very long. Saddam Hussein will not last after he's lost.
John McCain, you got Tehran at the top of the Gulf, you got Iraq there, and you got Hafiz al-Assad. How do you build a new world order with these fellows?
What we've done sent a message to every one of those tyrants that if they do the same thing that Saddam Hussein did, they will get the same result.
So would you have expected 10 years ago the United States would now be fighting the war to restore Iran to its position as dominant power in the world?
No, I think we're doing so now.
No, we don't. Well then, but as you said, you would take the president's word for everything. Look, we've got to be able to bear the pain of the Iraqi civilian more stoically. I mean, this is an obligation that the president lays upon us. These people in the shelters and elsewhere, all over Baghdad and Basra and so on, all had to be killed to show that we can do it. All of this was completely unnecessary. The call that you say didn't mention withdrawal, the word was in fact evacuation. It was agreed by Iraq before the deadline.
You believe the president is not fighting for the liberation of
George Bush's face. This is the war of George Bush's face. If he calls it off now, he's done it all for nothing.
Let me just say,
the Hitler stuff was all for show. All the civilians in Iraq were killed. Just to make what point? They could have had this evacuation months before the January 15th deadline.
When we come back, we can ask those gentlemen if they believe the war will be over by the end of the weekend.
Dishwasher. It does almost everything but clear the table. Calumet Farm in Kentucky has produced more legendary racehorses than any other stable. Whirlaway, Citation, Alidar. When excellence becomes a tradition, there's no end to the greatness. And it doesn't happen only in horse racing. Ford has set the pace in the auto industry from the outset. And with billions of dollars invested in models like our new Crown Victoria and Grand Marquis, we're going to stay out in front. Ford Motor Company.
Advantages. We both have Schwab accounts, but I've got the edge. We both have Schwab One, the brokerage account with free checking. Both save on commissions, and both earn income between investments. My old broker charged $80 for an account with checking. At Schwab, we pay $6. But I still got Jack beat because I can find my Schwab checkbook.
For a free Schwab Fact Kit, call toll-free 800-257-1257. Along with the Glaciers, a string quartet. There are eagles and old world antiques. Midnight Sound, Rosenthal China, the finest service, and the spouting whales. Surely there is no land on earth more magnificent and wild than Alaska, and nowhere more civilized to see it than aboard the ships of Holland America, the world's best cruise line.
John McCain, what is your feeling or sense? I know we don't have any details. Do you think the war is just about over?
My sense for a long time has been that the smartest thing Saddam Hussein could do is say he will withdraw at the appropriate time. That gives us an enormous dilemma. I think there's a possibility that this war could be over soon.
I'd love to be wrong, but they blew up the bridge of Saddam's withdrawal from the first week of this crisis, when King Hussein offered to broker it. They've blown up every other bridge behind Saddam ever since. Their aim is to get Iraq gets it out. Otherwise, you just have to believe the plucky little Kuwait option.
So many conservatives are very troubled by the idea that we're making the Soviets heroes. They're peacemakers, we're war makers by allowing them to mediate this deal. Now, does that bother you at all?
No, it doesn't, Michael, because clearly Gorbachev needs some help now, even if it's international. But it does bother me, even though you don't think it's a big deal, it does bother me a bit that why didn't Aziz come out and make that statement? I would give it much more credibility than the intermediary. And
maybe he's making this just a theory. Maybe this is a small payoff to him, to the Soviets, for being peacemakers.
What's wrong with that? We'd still know who brokered the agreement.
Yeah, the Soviets could have put this out there. We could be pumping it up and see Aziz walk back from it.
Remember, there's also a 1914 problem here, in the sense of military scheduling taking over politics. They have now a very short window in which to wrap this up militarily. If they put it off now, they don't get another good chance, because the weather's going to change, Ramadan begins, the Hajj begins. They're going to, I think, denounce this as a play for time.
But I agree with they need to have a
Just a second, sir. Let me interrupt you. Let's go to the White House with Charles Beerbauer, CNN senior correspondent there. Charles, what do you have?
Yes, Bob. Well, we don't have the definitive statement yet, but we've been told that White House spokesman Martin Fitzwater will have a comment, a statement on the news from Moscow at 8:15. So that's just a short time away. He will be in the White House briefing them. In fact, President Bush has gone out to the theater this evening here in Washington, but not before meeting with the Secretary of State, Mr. Baker, his national security advisor. I understand Vice President Quayle was called into the White House. So there was a hurry-up conference here to take a look at just what we heard from the Soviet Union. There are reports that there might have been a phone call from Mr. Gorbachev to the president. No real detail as yet on that. So we will be looking forward to what the White House spokesman does have to say in a rather short while here, and that will be the first definitive word from the Bush administration.
Charles, what is the sense that you're picking up around there from talking to White House folks about this announcement? What is their feeling or sense?
Well, I'd like to be able to tell you that I've talked to a lot of them and they've given me a sense of that, but frankly, they've been very busy and closeted and not picking up their phones, and so we do not have a real sense as yet. One can look at the conditions as spelled out in Moscow and immediately draw the conclusion that there are several of these things, such as a ceasefire prior to a withdrawal, such as the dissolution of most of the UN resolutions that the Bush administration has already declared unacceptable conditions. So those are the things we should point to as we analyze it and as we hear from the White House.
Okay, we'll be hearing from the White House again in a few minutes. Thank you very much, Charles Beerbauer. Michael?
And we only have time left to thank our guests. Thank you, Christopher Hitchens. Thank you, Senator McCain. And Pat and I may be back in a moment.
Imagine your refrigerator with bigger door shelves, for bigger bottles, with leftovers left in quick-serve trays for leftover space, more space, nearly 27 cubic feet, and a door in the door for things you use more. Imagine GE's Space Center 27.
Ricola, the all-natural herb cough drop imported from Switzerland. Ricola has been soothing throats and relieving coughs naturally for over 60 years.
1985, 86, 87, 88, 89. For 6 straight years, the full-size pickup from GMC truck has retained more of its original value than any other in America. That's why sales of the Sierra are growing faster than any other full-size pickup. And we intend to keep it that way in 1991 with these new Sierras. And in 92, GMC truck, it's not just a truck anymore, it's quality on the road.
Introducing Fix-It Fresh with a crisp, clean feeling and a stronger hold than any other cream adhesive. A fresh new feeling and stronger hold are 2 new reasons to fix it and forget it.
His first assignment begins March 4th. Codename 7 Days of 007. TBS is giving him 7 days to find the villain, save the world, and get the girl. 7 Days of 007. Only TBS.
Pat, one thing certainly is clear in all this confusion, which is that the United States cannot start a ground war while this is going on, don't you think?
It's hard to see how they're going to do that. It probably doesn't look possible. We may be at the end of the battlefield and the beginning of the bazaar.
I hope so. From the left, I'm Mike Kinford. Good night for Crossfire.
From the right, Pat Buchanan. Join us tomorrow night for another edition of Crossfire.
This isn't good. Where will this money be better spent? The salt doesn't seem to be doing the trick. I'm paying how much for this?
It takes hard work to keep your company going.
You know, I could reach a local TV market more often for about the same price as this newspaper ad.
You can't afford to waste a dime.
Yeah, maybe I'll give cable a try.
Advertise on cable.
On Saturday mornings, Doug Moffat brings his boy to the family business. He tells his son how the Moffats have been making good food since the 1930s.
This is pretty much the way your grandparents did. And now I'm showing you.
Moffat's is more than a restaurant. It's one family serving another. Yours. Located on Hanover Street off Colina Road, just east of the Pointing Hills Mall. Henry Moffat's old-fashioned restaurant, where the tradition continues. The unforgettable songs from those wonderful years.
When in Detroit was Motor City. The best cars were made in the USA. Everybody had a V8. Cars have muscles. Well, but they weren't very smart, like 8 miles to the gallon.
This is CNN.
This is CNN's continuing coverage of the Persian Gulf War. In Washington, I'm Bernard Shaw.
And at CNN Center in Atlanta, I'm Susan Rook. We are expecting reaction from the White House to the Soviet peace initiative in 15 minutes. About an hour and a half ago, that announcement was made. It rekindled hopes that peace may be in the offing, in the horizon, in the Persian Gulf War. A Soviet spokesman saying Iraq has responded positively to President Gorbachev's plan to end the Gulf War. The announcement came after more than 2 hours of talks in Moscow between Soviet President Mikhail Gorbachev and Iraqi Foreign Minister Tariq Aziz. President Gorbachev's spokesman says the Soviet Union and Iraq agreed on 8 points aimed at ending the Gulf War.
We see the following approaches being evolved in this process that include the following positions. First, Iraq states about its full and unconditional withdrawal of its forces from Kuwait. Second, the withdrawal of forces begins on the second day after the cessation of hostilities. The withdrawal forces will take place in a fixed time frame for after the withdrawal of 2/3 of all the forces, Iraqi forces from Kuwait.
будут прекращены действия экономических санкций, предусмотренных
The economic sanctions envisaged by Iran will cease to apply to
После
Iraq.
окончания вывода войск из Кувейта,
After the end of the withdrawal of Iraqi forces from Kuwait,
тем самым будет исчерпаны причины, по которым
because it is ceased to exist, because it's for the corresponding resolutions of the Security Council,
резолюции
so thus those resolutions
прекратят свои действия.
would cease to be in effect. 6.
Сразу же после прекращения
After
огня
the ceasefire,
происходит освобождение всех военнопленных.
all the POWs will be immediately released.
Седьмое.
7.
За отводом войск
The withdrawal of forces
наблюдают страны, не участвующие
will be monitored by the countries not directly involved in
по
the conflict,
поручению Совета Безопасности
being so entrusted by the Security Council of the United Nations.
И последнее.
And
Работа по уточнению формулировок
they work on determining the details and specifications.
окончательный результат этой работы
The final outcome of this work will be made public today, on the 22nd of February, till the
государствам, членам Совета Безопасности,
countries present members of the Security Council of the United Nations.
The Soviet spokesman wrapped up his remarks by declaring it a good morning Moscow time and urging people in the briefing room to applaud.
Soon after that announcement in Moscow, Washington's diplomatic wheels were set into motion. Our senior White House correspondent, Charles Birbar, joins us now live. Charles, we realize the situation is very fluid. Where is the president? What has he been doing?
Well, in fact, Bernie, the president is at Ford's Theater here in Washington. He's gone out for the evening to see a play called Black Eagles, which is about the black airmen, the Tuskegee Airmen from World War II. But before doing that, he met with Secretary of State Baker, with his National Security Advisor, Brent Scowcroft. The Vice President was called back into the White House. This meeting, I believe, took place over in the residence, the President having left the Oval Office relatively early this afternoon. We have not as yet had any official reaction from the White House. We will get that from White House spokesman Marlin Fitzwater here in the briefing room shortly, in about 10 or 12 minutes from now, and I would not expect a whole lot of detail based on past performance in reaction to these statements coming out of either Moscow or out of Baghdad. So that is what we are waiting for. We do know that certainly they've had a chance to take a look at these items as spelled out by Mr. Ignatchenko in Moscow, presumably, but without confirmation at this point. There has been some official communication between Moscow and the White House, and one would expect that that's the sort of detail we will get. There are some obvious things in what Mr. Ignatchenko spelled out in Moscow that the White House has previously said are not acceptable. So one cannot conclude at this point that there's going to be a rejection. One would anticipate that there might be a much more detailed study, Bernie.
Charles, as we watch the clock, it seems that Marlin Fitzwater will be out in less than 10 minutes. Can one expect that the White House demeanor through this latest development will be what the White House's demeanor has been over the past few days? That is, cautious, methodical, thoughtful reflection on the major developments?
Well, one would anticipate that, of course. But what we have heard repeatedly through one event after another over the past nearly a week since the Iraqi proposal was made last Friday is that the U.S. and its allies have not deviated from their timetable, that they continue, as Mr. Fitzwater puts it, to prosecute the war, and that they have not as yet heard anything that would make them shift from that plan.
Just before we leave you, Charles, it occurs to me that this president tonight is doing what he's always done throughout this and the run-up to the war and the aftermath of the war, and that is not to appear to be captive to any breaking events by leaving the White House tonight.
Well, that's been his pattern. He deals with things and then goes about his business. We have heard him say precisely that Saddam Hussein will not make him a captive of the Oval Office. And he's had his meeting. He is out and about, and we'll get some results out of that shortly.
Okay, thank you, Charles Birbar at the White House. Of course, we'll come right back to you as soon as things are ready there. Susan?
Standing by live now at the State Department, CNN World Affairs correspondent Ralph Beckleiter. Ralph, as we await the White House response, are you able to give us any indication of the response from the State Department?
No, I don't have any indication of reaction here from the State Department, but I can offer some analysis of what Saddam has done and what the challenges the coalition are faced with at this point. After 5 weeks of relentless military pounding, Iraq's defiant Saddam Hussein caved in, and he's announced to the Kremlin now that Iraq will give up Kuwait and withdraw its troops unconditionally. Saddam also appears to have abandoned his claimed goal of linking a settlement of the Kuwait crisis to other Middle East issues, including the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. He has also given up any claim to the reconstruction of Iraq or the withdrawal of all international forces from the region, and he's no longer calling for a guarantee of Iraqi borders or rights to shipping on the Gulf. He has also apparently lost the demand for elimination of Iraqi debt, and he has eliminated any provision that bans anyone else from having a role in the future security situation in the Persian Gulf. Saddam Hussein didn't make those concessions himself, of course. He made them through an emissary in private talks with the Soviets. His last broadcast message, delivered at the very moment his emissary was on his way to Moscow, continued to claim a victory of martyrdom and to complain of the escalating demands of the alliance against him. Some officials believe Saddam's radio address was little more than an attempt to bolster his image among the Iraqi people, while at the same time sending a different message to Moscow with his foreign minister, Tariq Aziz. Now, the challenges the alliance faces at this point will be great as well. The alliance has insisted on the restoration of the government of Kuwait and that Iraq repay Kuwait for the damage it has caused there. For the moment, at least, we don't have any indication from Moscow that those two provisions have been dealt with. But, of course, the Soviets have said that other details remain yet to be worked out. So at this point, the alliance is going to have to perhaps wait and see what those details are, but then swallow hard and decide whether this is enough of a concession from Saddam Hussein to call an end to the crisis in the Gulf. So
how important is it that the issue of the Palestinian problem is notably conspicuous by its absence?
I think that's a very important thing. Saddam Hussein managed to win essentially two close allies during the war, and both of those alliances, the PLO and the government of Jordan, are alliances that are based on his pledges to try to force a solution to the Palestinian-Israeli conflict. And although he did make reference to that in his speeches, Saddam apparently has not won that concession from the Soviets. The Soviets appear to have convinced him through Tariq Aziz that that is not a viable option for Iraq at this point.
If President Bush decides not to accept this and not to negotiate, how tenuous does the coalition become at this point?
Well, first of all, President Bush is not negotiating. He can wake up in the morning and go before the American people and say he has not negotiated. I think most people will see through that claim in the sense that the United States has exchanged extensive messages with the Soviet Union, detailed messages in which the U.S. has explained what kinds of concessions the U.S. will insist on. The Soviets are believed to have passed those on, or at least are taking them into account in their negotiations with the Iraqis. And so the U.S. can say it did not negotiate with Saddam Hussein, and for that matter, Saddam can say it never had anything to do with George Bush. Now, as to whether the coalition falls apart, I've spoken with a number of coalition members in recent days, most of whom have said that if Saddam complies with the most important of the UN resolutions, essentially the ones calling for complete withdrawal from Kuwait, unconditional withdrawal, rolling back the situation to August 2nd, they see that it would be difficult for the coalition to remain in force and certainly difficult to keep the military pressure up in an attempt to get some of those other conditions spelled out. And Susan, let me just mention one more thing. Charles may have touched on this a moment ago. This administration in Washington has another goal in this war, in the battle in the Gulf. It is not a stated goal of the Pentagon, nor is it an official goal of the United States government, but Mr. Bush has made it clear, and that is to get Saddam Hussein himself out of power. If Saddam has caved and succeeds in winning this kind of an end to the crisis, he apparently will remain alive. We don't know whether the Iraqi people will sit still to have him remain in power after having seen their country destroyed under the military onslaught that he brought on.
Thank you, CNN's Ralph Pegwater, keeping us up to date with the very latest from the State Department. Momentarily, White House spokesman Marlin Fitzwater will be live with the first word of the White House reaction. We will also have reaction from the United Nations and Israel. We'll take a break. Our coverage will continue right after this.
Tonight.